welcome to Bloody Shed Lounge.
Bloody Shed.
You said I was never allowed to do that.
I think I might have. No, you were doing something different. You were doing
I was doing that.
You were doing it extra creepy.
Oh, okay. Welcome to Bloody Shed Lounge. We're happy to be here. We're excited about tonight's episode. And we'd like to ask you to make sure to like us and check us out on Instagram and all things podcasty, all of the sites. And
all of the sites on Pinterest, Pentagram. Oh wait.
Hey now.
I think we came up with a new website.
Hey now. Yeah, so check us out on Facebook and Instagram and Spotify.
Whatever.
And make sure to give us some feedback, leave comments, and like us and share us. We appreciate your support.
We've been thoroughly distracted by some politics recently, so we're a little rusty, and we've lubricated our brains with some alcohol.
It is the lounge, after all.
And, well, let's hope we go through. My notes are pretty rough on this one, but I think we can make it through this.
We're going to give it a shot.
We're going to give it a shot. So the topic is vampires. Not any old vampires, but real vampires.
Real vampires, although I think we'll probably delve into a little bit of pop culture.
Maybe, the nuance on how you define a real vampire. You know, I found 5 kinds. I'm making this up as I go, but I came up with what I would like to say is 5 kinds.
So this is and when you say 5 kinds, this is the vampire culture, the 5 different
not just culture,
vampires?
Not just the culture, not that, but beyond that, the 5 kinds of, quote, real vampires.
Oh, okay.
And well, I maybe real is even the wrong word to use, but clinical, right? Those are the ones that are violent or even, against themselves, auto-vampirism. There are lifestyle vampires. These are the fakers, the kids in capes, baby bats, whatever you want to call them.
Baby bats. Oh, that's cute.
And then there are psychic vampires, right? We call them energy vampires. Mm-hmm. And then there's the sanguinarian vampires, the blood, the sort of real deal.
They crave actual human blood.
And then there's an extra one that I would call medical vampirism. And of course, I think all of these overlap, right? Like there's hybrid, they're both psychic and sanguinary, or like vampires that claim it's a medical need. So there's overlap, but I think that kind of sums it up.
Well, and there's the sexual vampires that get their energy from sex. Maybe they're fall in the category of
I guess so. I know that some in the community will say that, well, it's about the energy force. So, hey, semen works, mm-hmm. Which I don't know. It seems a little bit of an excuse to get someone to swallow, but
let's edit that out. Ugh. I mean,
and to clarify, so I don't know. I think this might be a psychology thing that they call them vampirists, not vampires, because vampires are mythical. Vampirists are living, breathing people that practice.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's been around forever, right? Even as a medical practice. Like, I think, so to get philosophical with I'm on my second drink here, so I don't know how good the philosophy is going to be, but if you go back to cavemen, right, that you're living out on the savannah and you're trying to make ends meet by killing a tiger or a woolly mammoth, whatever. And you can grasp that when your buddy is dying of God knows what, that when all of the muscle withers away and they die, that, that meat, that muscle, that must be what makes strength, right? And when, a friend or family or whatever dies because they got gored by a woolly mammoth or something and all that red stuff's coming out of them, that red stuff must be life, right? Mm-hmm. So, you would think that that's oversimplifying it, but that's the underlying basis of this, right? That blood is a life force. And in some scientific sense, well, yeah, obviously it really is. But drinking blood and eating meat, therefore give life and strength, has been a concept going back eons. In fact, I just realized. So we just did a couple of cannibalism episodes. Mm-hmm. And really, that was a two-parter, but you could almost say this is an addendum to that, right? This is a third part because vampirism is, in fact, a form of cannibalism.
That's true.
Right? And you would think that this idea of the blood, I must consume with someone's blood, that's not just cavemen, because in the 1400s, 1500s, like, it was a medical thing. The doctors believed this shit. There was a well-known belief that drinking the blood of a healthy person or suckling milk from a young woman was a way for some old fuck to rejuvenate themselves, which just that's a visual in itself. And there's this weird recipe where you could like dry the blood to make some sort of marmalade thing that I wouldn't go into, like basically
marmalade,
like scab jam, basically.
Oh no. I don't think they're selling that at the organic health food stores.
No?
No.
I mean, there's blood pudding, but that's not humans.
Ugh.
You've never had blood pudding?
Well, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's not. I had some in Peru just because I promised I would try it. And it's, I don't know, nothing fancy about it.
Zero interest in blood pudding.
And so anyway, it was this common thing back in the 1400s all the way up through easily into the 1700s that if you were an old person, that, you would get the blood of some young, had to be somebody young and healthy, right? Because they believed it cured asthma, epilepsy, pleurisy, consumption, headaches. I don't know, anti-poison. If you drank it, your nagging mother-in-law ran away. I don't know. It was like the
fix-all.
It was like the Ensure nutrition shake of its day for old people, right?
I see.
Anyway, so yeah, and those who didn't take hot blood. So here's kind of an interesting thing. Like this kind of ties into barbers, right? That those who didn't take hot, fresh blood, they were willing to take like used blood if it was prepared in whatever way needed to be done. And that's where the barbers came in. That's why the poles were red, white, and blue when they would spin around like what we know them today. They were these poles, and red was for bloodletting. Right?
Really?
Yeah. And blue, I forget, white. Like it was blood. Oh, see, I'm going off memory here, guys. Blood was the red. The blue was if you just needed a haircut or whatever. White, I think, might have been for they pulled teeth or did operations and stuff.
Okay.
They were called barber surgeons, right? And it was maybe 200 years ago that they started kind of tightening down the laws and changing all of that. But so that was like this whole thing that just existed. Like we talk about vampires are these monsters, but it was part of normal life. And then like let's fast forward to the 1960s and it becomes this little tiny subculture. Maybe they were out there somewhere in their little small groups and they needed something that brought them together. And of all things, it was a fucking soap opera.
Dark Shadow.
It was, right.
Well, it's funny that I'm glad you mentioned that because when I was a child, I was immediately obsessed with it at around age 5. And in fact, I enjoyed playing with dolls and had dolls, but my dolls were always characters from Dark Shadows at a really young age. Yeah.
Ooh, what did Barnabas look like?
Well, he was just a scruffy Ken doll that I sort of cut his hair and tried to make him look like a vampire. But yeah, my earliest memory of playing with Barbie dolls was that they were vampires.
Nice. How did your mom feel about you defacing her?
Hated it. Hated it.
So yeah, so this they would have, we call them today. What do we call them today? Conventions. So they'd have these little Dark Shadows conventions, and it gave people a reason to come together with this thing. Like, oh my God, you do this too? Mm-hmm. And then in the mid-'70s, then Anne Rice writes Interview with a Vampire, and that is so the community starts building. And, then they would find willing blood donors, and they would go to places like S&M events, bondage. They'd find blood fetishists there, donors, basically, right? And so, goth clubs, pagan groups. And we should clarify that, like, the vampire community are not goths, hello. There's the crossover, but they're not the same damn thing. But then something we remember from our childhood was zines, right? And they're like the Midnight Sun, Dark Rose Journal, Shadowlands. These were just zines that people wrote. And so you get this community. But, man, it was going slow because they hadn't invented the internet yet.
Right.
And then they did invent the internet. And, so it just started developing into this whole thing. But, the one thing that they struggled with is this bad reputation about what a vampire is, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's this sort of community that they've created, but it does have a stigma, and kind of understandably, but it's also a group of people that have felt like outsiders, and they've found people that are like-minded, and there's within that culture, there's different types of vampires.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, I mean, going into our own life a little bit, like I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we were hanging out, and I have to imagine that we probably bumped shoulders with vampires and didn't realize it.
I was going to ask you about that, like, and we're not going to name names, of course, but I feel like looking back, I have no doubt that we encountered vampires, even the energy vampires, which...
Oh, we definitely did that. But I want to clarify that we're talking about a scene that we were hanging around, like suspension parties, and a lot of people that, I can't say names.
Well, it was a dark, artsy sort of genre or a culture that we were hanging around. That it was a lot of artists, a lot of fetish community,
body
and
modification.
Everyone was sort of coming together at that time. Where typical before that, people were sort of segregated into their own culture, and now you had like the body modification people and the artists, and everyone was coming together and sort of all as one group, but it was an interesting sort of dark, weird time.
Yeah. I mean, we must have, like looking back on it, we must have been the odd ones out and not
the nerds. You can say it. We were the nerds.
Were we the nerds? I don't know.
Sure.
Because we don't have body modification. Our tattoos are not visible.
No.
We're the normal kids that just stumbled into but they knew us. We were around. We knew a lot of these people.
I mean, I wouldn't say I necessarily felt accepted or rejected. We were just almost invisible.
Right. I wouldn't say we were ever rejected, because I think the whole point of any of these communities is self-expression, that it's about not being criticized for being who and what you are, Right. So to kind of get back to the challenge that they had is they were fighting against the same thing that every outsider group fights against: misperception, misrepresentation, and news, bad news, right? And it started going back in time. I can give you an early example. I'll fly through a few examples of this, and I think you might have one too. So going back to April 30th, 1932. Okay. And it's called Walpurgis Night. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah. It's so basically Europe is smarter than us, because exactly 6 months from Halloween, they have a second Halloween.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Walpurgis Night. So basically it's like your typical pagan festival for the season change that turned into a Christian festival, and they go out with pots and pans and bang things to scare stuff away, the spirits, and they wear masks and everything. And so it was a great party, crazy night. And Lily Lindstrom and Minnie Jensen, they lived in the same apartment complex, and it's Walpurgis Night. And they're friends, probably because they were both sex workers. And they'd stroll St. Eric Square and pick up Johns to take home, which I think is like, if you're going to do that, can I just suggest you don't bring them back to your own fucking house? But,
well, maybe they didn't have it. Maybe that's where they felt safest.
yeah, it's true. And Lily had a visit from her friend Minnie. It was around 6:30 p.m. And her phone rang. Some guy asked, hey, is this Lily Lindstrom? Yeah. And I want some action. Whatever he said. Mm-hmm. And so...
A date.
A date, yes. Okay. And so Minnie took off, went back downstairs to her apartment. And not long after, a little after 7, Lily had paid her rent and stopped by Minnie's place. Hey, can I borrow a condom? And I saw photos of it. My God, condoms in the 30s. I mean...
Yeah, I think they were basically like animal skin. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Or like intestine or something like that.
Yeah, I think intestine,
Yeah.
And apparently they weren't too reliable. She showed up a little bit later wearing nothing but a coat and asking for another one because the last one broke. Jesus. And that was the last that Minnie saw of Lily alive. About 9 o'clock, she rings Lily's door. Hey, you want to go somewhere with me? It's like a festival. Let's go hang out. Let's join the party. Maybe we get a John, whatever. And no answer. So maybe Minnie assumed, maybe she went out with her customer. What do they call them?
Well, you've been calling him a John all
I know,
day.
but I feel like that's the wrong word. What are you supposed to call it? Client?
I guess so.
Client. Okay, I'll say client from now on.
Okay.
Anyway, after 4 days of not getting a reply, Minnie's worried, obviously. I mean, they work in a dangerous career. So she goes to the police, and the police show up, and they knock, and nobody answers, so they knock the door down. And they find Lily in her studio apartment, naked, dead, face down on an ottoman with the cushions stuck on top of her. The whole apartment is meticulously cleaned. Her clothes were folded neatly on a chair. Like everything just looked normal except that she was dead and her head had been bashed in. Mm-hmm. So investigators had a physician autopsy her and determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, crushed by 3 hard blows from behind with a heavy round object like a pipe or something. And one of the borrowed condoms was found between her legs hanging out. And then they discovered all the blood had been drained from her body.
All of the blood drained?
Yes. And saliva on her neck and body, and a gravy ladle that they say was stained with blood. And we don't know how much of this is all true. One of the police officers investigated the case was interviewed many years later. In fact, I think he got in trouble because he had a box of the evidence, like he had the ladle and stuff like that with him at his apartment.
Really?
Which is weird. They had they ended up changing the laws because of that. But yeah, nobody found anything. They questioned maybe 8 or 9 people, clients, whatever, and it's an unsolved murder to this day. The thing is calling, so it became known as the Atlas vampire, right? But because Atlas was the neighborhood in Stockholm where she lived.
Okay.
And that was kind of a later development. It was just the Atlas murder at the time. Calling it a vampire was a later thing. And there are even people who say, police, who said later that we didn't even know that the brown stuff on the ladle was blood.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was
what
the 30s.
What did they think it was?
I don't know. I mean, it could have been gravy or something, but it was the 30s. They didn't have
forensic technology.
Who knows? And the problem is there is no more to the story. I mean, there might be a couple more nuggets out there, but I don't speak any of that language or read any of that language, so I and no one else has ever found anything beyond that. But it gets pulled into a bunch of articles to this day that people always mention about real vampires. Like another case that I know you're aware of, and I'll just fly through this one because a lot of people talk about this. But in the late 70s, there was a batshit crazy motherfucker called Richard Chase.
Right.
The Vampire of Sacramento, 1977. At 10, he was doing the trifecta, right? He was wetting the bed, setting small fires, hunting animals, drinking their blood, into heavy drugs in his teens, and he just spirals out of control. He was already the son of a mentally ill mother and an overbearing dad, and his mom was afraid that dad was poisoning her, and he probably absorbed that into his insane brain. Shaved his head once because, he thought his skull bones were shifting around and he wanted to be able to see what was going on. Killing puppies left and right, the occasional.
That's the thing that always disturbs me so much, and I don't mean to sound unsympathetic or whatever, but it's always with the animals.
Right.
It always starts out where they start out killing the small animals and then go on from there. So big red flags.
Big red flag. Well, that's I forget what they call it, but the trifecta is wetting the bed, which I think I don't know.
That sounds unfair.
That one. I think there are a lot of psychologists that challenge that because that's an involuntary thing.
Yeah, that sounds unfair.
I mean, at 10 he was wetting the bed, but still. But yeah, killing animals and what was he? Setting fires. Those I think are definitely an indication. But yeah, he was definitely destined to fail. He was killing all these animals. He was accusing people of stealing his femoral artery.
What's that?
I think it's the artery in your neck, right? He was in the hospital for injecting rabbit blood into himself.
Wow.
He was not right in the head. And I want to get to that in a second because
he
I think
didn't get the help he needed.
No, he didn't. Well, there was a lot of things that fell through the cracks that they knew he had issues, but they never institutionalized him. And he ended up in the hospital, psych wards and stuff for brief stints here and there. And they put him on drugs. They decided he must have schizophrenia. And then there's this weird moment in classic moments of bad decisions that his mom gets the bright idea that he doesn't need these drugs.
I need them.
Possibly, who knows?
Mommy's a little helper.
I'm going to wean him off of his drugs so I can have them.
Right.
Who knows? But he's off his drugs and explodes. He's killing more dogs left and right and drinking their blood. He just randomly drive-by shoots a dude. He gets a 22 pistol.
I remember reading about that.
Right?
And that, too, because he did become a serial killer and serial rapist, it was unusual. It's very unusual in that he didn't follow sort of a protocol.
Yeah.
He was so random where he would randomly shoot people, like an old man taking his groceries in the house, and very, very random, which is unusual for a serial killer.
Well, because what he was doing is he would just go to doors, and here's your vampire parallel, right? If the door was unlocked, then, he must be invited in. Mm-hmm. If it was locked, well, then he wouldn't bother him because he's obviously not invited.
Lock your doors, people.
You lock your fucking doors. So, yeah, he kills a 22-year-old woman who's 3 months pregnant, drinks her blood, and totally guts her. It's just horrifying.
Yeah, his story is horrible.
He's a crazy McFuckknuckle that
I've never heard that before.
I don't know. I probably heard that from you. You've never said that?
I don't know.
I don't know. Okay. Yeah, well, he's a fuckknuckle. And he ended up convicted of 6 murders, gas chamber. He never made it, though. All the inmates were afraid of him, so they kept trying to talk him into suicide, which he did.
Right.
And
I'm sure it didn't take a lot of convincing, though.
Well, who knows? So, yeah, he killed himself in I think it was 1980. But I want to kind of back up here. So this, again, to the point of how this is an issue, is that was his obsession with blood was a symptom of a different issue
of his mental illness,
or co-occurring disorder, or whatever, and it goes through. James Riva in 1980 shot his grandma and tried to drink her blood from the bullet wounds. Right, he's still alive, by the way, in prison. Schizophrenia. There's some Turkish dude in 2013 who a vampire supposedly attacked a bunch of people. He was a troubled soldier who had multiple personality disorder. Roderick Farrell, he was born in 80, and in 1998, he had a little vampire clan, and he's on death row. He was the youngest person put on death row, and he did all kinds of crazy bullshit. He thought he was a 500-year-old vampire, and he was diagnosed with Asperger's. So you kind of see a theme here, right?
Yes.
Or, okay, can I tell you this one?
Okay.
This one made me queasy.
Oh, okay. So let's do a little disclaimer. We should have done a disclaimer at the beginning of this anyway.
Oops,
but
sorry.
anyway, here's our disclaimer midway through.
So Richard Knoll is a guy who wrote a book where he collected case studies of clinical vampirism, right? People who, not people in lifestyle, people who I'm describing, who have actually mental issues, and the blood thing is part of it.
And act on it in an inappropriate way. They don't have a volunteer that allows them, a partner that allows them to drink their blood. These are people that act in this way inappropriately against other people's wishes or desires.
Right. And so Knoll writes this book collecting all of these different clinical studies. And in the beginning of it, he actually wrote this whole thing, and as a total tongue-in-cheek, he kind of made this made-up term called Renfield Syndrome.
Okay.
And it was not intended as a real thing. But if you hear that term, Renfield Syndrome, that's where it came from, and that's another term for clinical vampirism is Renfield syndrome. Everyone knows.
And does that mean the people that crave or desire people to take people's blood against their will?
No, not necessarily, because the guy I'm about to talk about was auto-vampirism. He actually took his own blood. But there's actually a difference between clinical vampirism and Renfield syndrome in a sense that and I'm not going to remember it well here, but Renfield syndrome involves more like animals and stuff. It more mirrors the actual story of Renfield in Dracula. But there are nuances. But really, at the end of the day, it was a made-up term. But in this book, he tells one of the guys, a Dr. Robert McCulley, tells the story of a patient. Obviously, these are real patients, so I don't have a name. It's just a patient who practiced auto-vampirism. He would puncture. He started small. He would break a little razor and stuff, but he would start with the small veins on his neck, and then he graduated to puncturing his own carotid artery and doing what's called a Valsalva maneuver, which is like doctors prescribe this action to people who have heart conditions, that you pinch your nose, like you're trying to take a shit, and then you breathe out.
What are you talking about?
It's a way to lower your blood pressure, but he was doing it because it would make the blood squirt out.
Oh.
Right? And he would lie on his bed, on his back, right? And he would squirt the blood from his carotid artery, which I didn't think you could survive, and he would squirt it into his mouth in like the vampire's equivalent of trying to get popcorn in your mouth by tossing it, right? He's turning himself into a fucking sprinkler fountain of blood. What the fuck?
Wow.
And the bed sheets, the laundry.
I thought foot fetishes were weird. No offense to the foot fetishers out there.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Anyway, but yeah. I mean, I think you dug into a story that talks about like one of these people that.
Well, this guy I was looking at, Nicolas Claux, was he's 48 years old now, and he was born in 1972. And he was born in France and lived in France most of his life until his family moved to Portugal during his teenage years. But at an early age, he developed sort of this fetish with all things dead and morgues and cemeteries. And he thinks that was because when he witnessed his grandfather die, and participating in the wake and visiting his grandfather at the morgue, that's really kind of when he developed this obsession. But he started spending a lot of time in cemeteries as a teenager, and would sneak into the mausoleums and the graves and became obsessed. He joined the army when he was 18 years old, and from there learned to actually work in a morgue, assisting morticians. And that really developed and pushed his obsession even further. So he would actually take pieces of the bodies from the morgue, fillet them, and consume them raw or take them home with him. He would drink.
Nobody noticed? Hey, this dude's arm's missing.
Well, I don't think he would take that much. But he would consume blood, and he was also working at a blood bank, and he would steal bags of blood that he would keep in his refrigerator and incorporate into his meals. And he was just obsessed with all things death and cannibalism and vampiristic. So he started grave robbing, and he claims to have stolen hundreds of skulls and bones and had them in his house or his apartment that he lived in France with his parents. And he actually recalled in an interview, I read a specific story where he had snuck into a grave and had opened up the casket. And he also describes, you can hear interviews with him, watch interviews with him, read interviews with him. He's really open about all of this. It's incredible. But he talks about opening up this casket and how to get into caskets, how caskets have 8 screws and how you get into the casket. It's really morbid, but
8 screws specifically.
Specifically, right, and the tools that you need to use to do it. But
so, hey, you morticians out there, you need to up the screw count.
Right, exactly. Keep these weirdos away. But at this specific casket, he opened it up, and the body was encased in a shroud. And he describes it how the body was bloated. When he tried to peel it off, it was tacky like fly paper. Yeah. And it wasn't decomposed enough for him he wanted to take the head with him, but it wasn't decomposed enough. So his goal was to come back later. So he left it sort of cracked open a little bit so it would advance the
Wait, but the hole is already dug?
It was in a mausoleum.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So
he left it cracked open and went back about 2 or 3 months later. And then when he lifted the lid again, it was in such a state of decomposition that for this guy, it actually made him sick, and it was covered in those little flies like we've talked about in previous episodes. Yeah. But his intention was to actually hack the head off and take it with him, but he couldn't do it. It made him physically sick. And this guy is like
really? So that's where you draw the line? Is
exactly.
Flies.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't like flies in my food, but
no. So it wasn't enough for him, though. So he continued on. And then on the morning of October 4th, 1994, he had a goal of finding a victim that he actually did want to kill and consume. And he met that victim in Terry Bissonnière. He was 34 years old, and he met him through an online sort of dating chat room, looking to have a gay hookup, a meeting, a sexual meeting. And even though Nico wasn't gay, he thought that would be easy prey for him.
Oh.
So he met him, took him back to his apartment, and he said he really didn't care what age or sex or race or anything. He just wanted a victim because he wanted to further his obsession. So he brought him back to his apartment and ended up shooting him and watching this poor guy die while he sat in the corner eating cookies.
What?
And watching him suffer. And there's not a lot of detail about then what he did after that. But to kind of make a long story short, he was ultimately caught because he was using his victim's identification. He was tried, but they found him clinically insane, so to speak, where he was very convincing in that he wasn't capable of controlling his actions.
Right.
So he was sentenced to 12 years.
12 years?
12 years. During that time when he was in prison, he says that he was corresponding with other killers, including a lot of really famous serial killers like Richard Ramirez and the Happy Face Killer and all these other killers. And he has all this memorabilia to prove it. But he was released after 7 years, and he's out now.
Oh, he's out now?
He's out now. He's 48 years old now. And how he makes his living is he sells his graphic, morbid art, his paintings. He became an artist, and he sells his paintings based on the serial killers that he corresponded with and his own visions. And his paintings sell for about, I looked at his website, but his paintings sell for about $200 a piece.
Wow.
And most of them are sold out. They sell out. They sell out very quickly. And he does go around to these sort of, these vampire gothic, because he's considered the vampire of Paris. That's his nickname, the vampire of Paris.
So he's cashing in on it.
He's cashing in on it.
Dude, no, you're doing a different thing.
Yeah, it's really weird. And he also talked about, in the interview that I watched, he talks about sneaking into Armin Meiwes's German castle. Remember
we just talked about him in the last episode.
Right. He did. He talked about taking the train to Germany and sneaking into Armin Meiwes's home, which is abandoned, this abandoned home. He said it was difficult to do because there's a neighbor that from where their house is can oversee this abandoned house. And I guess they get really tired of these people looky-loos coming over and trying to sneak into the house, but he was able to do it, so he says. And he showed he claims to have stolen the hook
that the body was hung from
that slaughter room,
right?
And he stole like some dishware and stuff, but some plates and stuff. So but this guy, I don't know, a lot of people aren't sure what to believe about him. We do know of the crime that he was convicted of.
Right.
And what we're not sure about are his claims of the skulls and the bones and the collections of blood that he had, because there's no mention of that in any of his convictions. In his conviction,
nobody found a bunch of skulls.
It said yes, but it's not referenced in his actual trial. So that's unclear. But the original investigator in this maintained his position through all of this, because he was actually moved to a different position, but he wanted to stay with this because he had a feeling that during that time there were about 8 other murders that were very similar. His belief was that Nico was involved in those murders, but Nico's never confessed to that, and there's no proof of that.
Oh, and he's not going to say anything because,
because why would he? He's out.
I only served 12 years.
He served 7.
What?
He served 7 of the 12.
Oh my God.
And
they need to change a few rules over there.
On his final day, when he was to be released, he was called in by a psychiatrist and had to go through a 5-hour interview.
I was going to ask, what is he diagnosed with?
The diagnosis is confusing to me. It's confusing. But if you're curious, you can look through all of that. It's a lot. But he was able, and he says in his interview that I had to put on my, straight face and convince the psychiatrist that I was sane just because I wanted to get out.
Right. All right. So I guess to kind of bring it back around so we're talking about all of these people that are mentally unstable and getting called vampires. They're not designated vampires. Mm-hmm. But there are people that still were kind of breaking some rules, and it forced the community to have to change their rules. Like there was even one right here in good old Phoenix, actually out in Chandler. In Chandler, I think it was in Chandler. So Aaron Homer, 24-year-old kid, and Amanda Williamson, 21, were arrested after stabbing Robert Maley, a 25-year-old transient who was staying in the apartment with them. He runs off. They call police. They stabbed him. They called the police. And like Aaron says, my girlfriend was attacked by somebody. Okay. And the cops show up and they see a trail of blood. So that makes it kind of easy to find Maley, or Malley, however you say his name. Mm-hmm. And he's a few blocks away, and he tells them, they fucking stabbed me.
I think I remember this in the news. I do remember
this. Is 2010.
Yeah.
And because he refused to let them drink his blood a second time.
Right.
It's like, wait, you let them do it the first time? Yeah, and presumably mocked their religion, so Aaron lost his shit and stabbed him.
Wow.
So
And who says nothing's happening in Chandler?
nothing's happening in Chandler? Nah. So yeah, they were arrested for filing a false report, aggravated assault, and poor Maley, he actually gets arrested too for parole violation. Like shit, for all that trouble, I also get arrested. But let's just say bad publicity all around, and people just trying to get their little blood drinking on their.
Not that we're condoning that.
No. It's. I mean, in my mind, it's a little bit of a cruel beverage, but you know.
I don't get it, but to each their own is kind of like our opinion about things like that. As long as you're being safe and you're not, everyone's in agreement and adults are all being adult together.
Well, and I think
none of our business.
I think that's what they did is they started, you know, like there was Michelle Bellinger and others, like I think she's out of Ohio, and Father Sebastian in New York, and Damien DeVille and Vertilac and Damonex.
Well, I met a vampire when I was in New Orleans.
Did you? Oh.
And he's the one that created the I forget what he calls it, but it's basically like this. It's kind of like this constitution for vampires where everyone's in agreement, and there's like this vampire oath where it's to protect the people that aren't vampires, basically, and so that everyone's all in agreement. Anyway, I went to his voodoo museum in New Orleans.
Yeah, like what you put museum in air quotes.
Well, because it's a store, but there's a lot happening there. There's all these different altars, and I do remember meeting him there. It's small. Everything in the French Quarter, the buildings are so old that, you know, to afford a space there, it's a small space. But I did meet him, and this is before. You know, this was several years ago, 2 years ago, before we started researching this topic. And then in researching this topic, I was like, hey, I know that. I met that guy.
Oh, weird.
But yeah, so I like that there's...
Do you remember his name?
Not off the top of my head. I don't. But he's very well known. But I'd like that there's an ethical side to this, and it's...
They had to. All of these people had to come together because, you need a little ethics if you're going to do something like that.
Right, and he's very much about serving the community and being and sort of defying those stigmas and making sure that people understand that they aren't just these scary people that are doing things to you know, against other people's will, so to speak.
Yeah, it's just something that for them that feels, I don't know, it's a blurry. Well, okay. Let's. If you were to define what a vampire, real vampire, modern day culture, how would you define a vampire?
I guess because you and I both have kind of broad experience with this, and I think we've met people that dabbled in this, if not were fully immersed in it. I have different ideas. I'm aware of the energy vampires that I'm not even sure that they're aware that they're energy vampires.
I think a lot of them aren't.
And I'm aware of people that actually practice or live the lifestyle. So I don't know. To me, I don't know that I can specifically say like what my definition is. What about you?
Well, I see. I can't because I read up on this, so now I can't give a pure answer what I think because I've got all of the research stuck in my head.
Right.
But I mean, I don't think it's too far off. I think it's pure and simple. There's two types of vampires. Those who, for whatever reason, consume human blood. Probably some of them consume animal blood. They'll like lick the meat my grandma might have been a vampire. Whenever she was making hamburgers, she would eat the raw meat.
I've heard about people doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I got off track there. And then, we always talk about psychic vampires, and that's actually kind of an interesting thing. Psychic energy or energy vampires that the community is trying to claim that word for their own because it actually has a bad negative connotation. We have known some energy vampires
for sure, and
were
I've
horrible people and didn't know they were.
And I'm really sensitive to that, and I always have been.
Right.
And I think there are people that are aware that they're doing it, and they just don't care because that's how they feed. To put it bluntly. and they're very well aware of what they're doing.
And there you go. A reason you need a code of ethics and all of that good stuff.
Right.
The one thing that I struggle with though in this is when it goes into like it crosses over into that I have to do it and it's a medical condition. Now, there's a lot we don't know, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I keep an open mind, but one of the things that they'll bring up, I've seen in one documentary where they talk about something called porphyria, which it's like a group of 8 extremely rare disorders that affect like the liver, the nervous system, etc. And what it is it's caused by low levels of specific enzyme that's needed to make heme, which is part of your like hemoglobin. And it's like a compound that contains iron in it. Which, by the way, keep that in mind that you can't just like guzzle blood because you will die of blood poisoning if you don't puke it all out first.
Yeah, don't guzzle blood.
Don't. Like when
don't drink any blood right now.
When the community
blood.
does this, they're taking little tiny X cuts on somebody's shoulder and just a few drops. That's all they're doing.
The people that are heavily involved in this culture, everyone is tested for for disease, and they're tested regularly, and they're very, very cautious medically to make sure that no one is injured, and everyone's it's on a volunteer basis. So, but just don't do this, don't practice this unless you feel 100% knowledgeable about what you're doing.
And you have a support group if you're into this. You need to talk to them because there have been issues. There's in a couple of books I saw, no one has ever mentioned anyone ever getting AIDS from this because they're careful. But there was a small outbreak of hepatitis in New York. So They have learned their lesson, and you need to be really cautious. But the porphyria thing. So porphyria, so you produce this compound, and when things go wrong, one of the steps in the process is porphyrins. It's like a light activated compound chemical. It's a byproduct of that construction process, right? And when things go wrong, it builds up in your system, and a lot of it will get to your skin on some people, and you get what's called cutaneous porphyria. And so you can't go out, sound familiar, you can't go out in sunlight.
Right.
Like the sun will go through and severely damage you. And so a lot of people have taken this and claimed that they have porphyria. And I don't know. So it's tricky because you can actually consume blood and you get heme from the blood. Like when we eat a hamburger and if there's any blood in it, we can consume that, and it doesn't get destroyed by your stomach enzymes. It does pass through and get into your system. So you are getting heme, right? But I still have a hard
But it doesn't need to be human blood necessarily.
Not necessarily. And I mean, it can be dangerous. Heme transfusions are what a lot of times is done. And there's not very many people. It's extremely rare group of disease.
It seems more like a fetish to me than an actual...
Well, I think what it is, and again, I say this with all respect to the community, I think that a lot of people like what they like, but they seek out explanations and find things that might explain it. Mm-hmm. And I think this might be one of those. I don't know.
It's the same reason I need rosé. It actually fills a medical need for me.
Okay. I'm willing to accept. Okay. All right. Then if we can accept that, then we can accept that maybe porphyria is one of the things.
I'm sorry. I'm making light of it, but I get what you're saying.
But I mean, they probably have an ongoing challenge beyond those little things that it's never going to be commonly accepted.
No.
I mean, there's been vampire panics through history, just like there's been witch pandemics.
Well, and that's part of what makes it so culturally interesting, why pop culture continues to have a vampire movie every year, and why often these vampire movies depict culturally what's going on within society.
Right.
If you look at going back through the Dracula or vampire movies throughout history, you can see, sort of depict what was happening culturally within that time by what was happening in the vampire movie of that year.
And I think that makes sense because vampirism is as old as time, that it goes back through history, all the examples of it or legends of it. And I think it's just this very primal thing. There's a sexuality in it.
I agree. I think Dracula in particular is a complicated character.
Yeah.
And when you look at him through just from film adaptations going from we'll say like 1922 forward, because Dracula, the Universal picture, wasn't the first film.
Oh, no.
But going forward from, say, 1922 all the way through Hollywood history, you can see this thread of where Dracula's trying to figure himself out a little bit.
Right.
And deal with and battling not only his own personal demons and trying to satisfy these urges, but his surroundings.
Right.
And it's sort of like man against man, man against himself, man against man, man against society. And I think the Dracula has become to sort of stand for a lot more than just this monster that we're familiar with.
Right. And I mean, we've been obsessed with it even longer than that. Like 1818 was when this really started with, there was a guy, Polidori, who was one of Mary Shelley's friends, right? So they were hanging out and, hey, let's write stories. I'm going to write one. And she came up with Frankenstein. And Polidori wrote The Vampire.
Right.
And it was like a massive bestseller. He didn't get to enjoy that shit long. He died like 3 years later, but...
Right. Well, yeah, and Bram Stoker's same thing. He didn't get a chance to really enjoy his masterpiece either. And there's even Kipling wrote a poem called The Vampiris. And so, yeah, it's been a subject for a long time.
Yeah, and it's going to be for a long time. And so do you think there's much culture still today? It seems to have died down. Like I looked here locally in Phoenix, and there's the closest I could find. So there was, I forget what the name of the actual club was, but they had Transylvania Night, and like there was a DJ Poe. I forget what.
Yeah, that's where I had my first my one and only martini I've ever had in my life.
Really? Well, how do you not have martinis? They're not that bad.
They're so strong.
Well,
it's I and then that cup, the glass is hard to carry around.
I don't approve of the cup. That's bullshit. Like, just give me a mug.
I think I spilled a third of it before I even had a sip of my $12 martini, surrounded by vampires.
So I looked, and the closest I could find is, and I don't know, but this DJ, Robert Poe, I think is his name, he still DJs. There's a club called Stacy's in town that has Lilith Night.
Oh, fun.
And it's not far. It's up the street on 7th Avenue.
Okay, we should go.
Yeah, and it's Wednesdays. Wednesdays we're old.
Damn it, vampires. Why you got to do it on Wednesdays? And when I was in New Orleans and we went to the Dungeon, which is the bar where all the vampires hang out in the French Quarter, and I found out that no one shows up until midnight. I'm like,
hello, vampires.
Well,
and you're like, but the sun sets at 7.
I know. Come on. Like, is there a happy hour menu while we wait? No. There's no like cheesy tater tots while you wait for the vampires to show up.
Get a Bloody Mary. No,
that would have been good.
You should have.
Yeah.
No, they would have kicked you out of the place. Like, you fucking poser, get out.
Oh, well, it's the French Quarter. Anything goes.
Oh, okay. But there you go. All right. We rambled for, I don't know, 45 minutes or so about the real vampires, and a few of them are good and a few of them are not so good.
And like we said, it's a complicated story. There's a lot of layers to this. Mm-hmm. A lot of garlic layers.
Garlic layers. Yeah, like pulling back the layers of a garlic onion.
That's right.
And you know what? I guarantee we just barely scratched the surface. We'll probably come back to this.
Oh, absolutely. Because in my opinion, it's sort of the foundation of all things goth and dark. I think it starts with
you think so?
Dracula. Dracula was the first monster, like the first sort of glorified monster, in my opinion.
I know, but don't tell vampires. Vampires don't like to. We're not all goths. We're not.
I agree. But when you, as one whole thing, like that dark lifestyle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it starts with Dracula and the history of vampires, in my opinion.
Maybe
I don't know what that was.
I heard
Something scratching at the window.
There's a vampire trying to get in. We already pissed them off. All right, well, we better wrap this up. Our intro and outro music was by
Moonlight Magic on H's.
No,
and the song is H's for Horse.
How have we not gotten this right?
I don't know. We'll get it figured out.
H's for...
The song is H's for Horse by Moonlight Magic, and you can find them on Spotify. We want to thank them for their contribution.
Yes. And don't forget to like us and share us and tell all your vampire friends about us.
One a vampire, two a vampire.
Did you seriously try to work in Count? Oh,
I was waiting.
Now I'm going to have some Count Chocula. And
It only comes out at Halloween.
Oh, really?
Yes. How do people not know this?
I thought it was year round.
No, it only comes out around Halloween.
I don't think. Well, okay, but Walpurgis night, when I want to eat it, I should be allowed to. I have to go to Europe?
With your Count Chocula. Yes.
Okay. I guess we are the nerds.
We are. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We appreciate you.
And ciao. Ooh, there was no vampire teeth in that kiss.
Ask you if there was a current celebrity or past celebrity, I guess it doesn't matter, that you think was possibly a real vampire, who do you think it would be? I know, because you think about, I think Tom Cruise maybe is a vampire.
No, vampires and Scientologists are not the same thing.
I don't know, but he's kind of vampire-ish to me. Maybe Johnny Depp is a vampire.
He crossed my mind for a second.
Really?
He did. He crossed my mind for a second. So that's 2 votes for
Tommy Lee.
No, he's just a ding dong.
Yeah, he's a ding dong with a big ding dong.